Hi there, how are you doing? Hope you are keeping well. Going to be a pretty short video this week because I've got a very interesting week in that I'm giving a talk which will be tomorrow, the day after I film this video, but chances are this video will go up after the talk on data privacy. That will hopefully be up on LinkedIn, so you'll be able to watch it. I think it's being filmed, so you can hear me talking about data privacy professionals, what they should be doing, what they would involve, and basically be probably getting overexcited and geeking out on data privacy law, which, you know, may be something you're into. Maybe you're not as much of a geek on it as me, but there we go. So this week I'm talking about three very, very small things, one bigger than the others, but really updates on previous videos or something that I thought might be interesting for all you guys. First one, purely nerding out on this, is the whole Elon Musk SpaceX sending a shuttle with astronauts on it to the International Space Station, which is so cool. I spent my entire life, as you probably can guess, from my interest in sci-fi, which I'm sure I've mentioned more than once here on these videos. I always thought that I would be working in space by now, ideally as a TIE fighter pilot, not a TIE fighter pilot, that'd be awful, that'd be for the Empire, an X-Wing pilot shooting down TIE fighters. Obviously I moved on to more obvious things. But it could be a taste of the future, and it could be a taste of what space travel might be like when it becomes commercialized and, of course, regulated. There is actually, in most countries, there is some sort of law of varying degrees of complexity relating to space travel and satellites. Even in Hong Kong, you'd be surprised to learn, we actually have an outer space ordinance, but it'd be interesting to see how that develops and how things are regulated. Now, I worry that I'll be too old by the time I can actually go into space to go into space. I also worry, having watched Brad Pitt's film Ad Astra, that going into space will be very, very boring, no different than going on a very expensive airplane, and that, like Brad Pitt, I'd just be very sad all the way there, then I'd just come back again. That would be the end of the film. Sorry if I've ruined that film for you. But there you go. I'm very excited about that. Second thing, which I think is important, you may remember quite a while ago I did a video about cybersecurity in the time of COVID-19, and that, or everything I said in that video pretty much remains true. There are still issues. This last week, well actually at the weekend, I had my first phishing attempt on me using COVID-19 as a reason. This was something telling me that I was required to complete a compulsory health check and to click this link to start the check. I'm pretty sure I didn't click the link, obviously I'm not a complete fool. It was badly worded, as many phishing attempts are. I often wonder why they don't hire a proofreader or a spell checker. They'd probably be more successful, but it means they are coming. I've also seen here in Hong Kong, although this was happening online before, but I think it's got to become a bit more sophisticated, people saying donate to this charity or buy masks for people who are in need by clicking this link and donating money. Just be vigilant out there. I told you these things were going to come. What you possibly should be doing at this point in time is educating your staff to be very careful, because remember, people worry so much about health-related issues that it's easier to be phished. They will trust something thinking it must be from the government, must be from a health agency, therefore they should follow through. Don't let them be fooled. I don't want to see an increase in people essentially being hacked, or some awful large-scale cyber attacks where criminals, wherever they may be they state-sponsored or some guy in his bedroom, are getting richer and richer just because they're preying essentially on the fears of people. So yeah, do be very, very careful indeed. I have no doubt that they will start attacking organizations, and unfortunately they will probably increase as more and more of them are successful. So be alert and be vigilant, pretty much the same as if you're dealing with COVID-19 at the moment. Now the world is, 2020 as a year has been, it's been pretty bad, let's be honest. What are the pros of 2020 so far? Commercial trip into space, I've just mentioned that. Yeah, some good records came out so far, I suppose, that's about it. And one of my most anticipated albums of the year is out next week, but doesn't really counterfeit the stuff that's been going on all over the world, be it in China, Hong Kong, the UK, most recently in the US. But there's one thing that all of the disasters we've faced in the last, I suppose in the last year, if not for the last however many years, have had in common, and that is their presence on social media. Now, this last couple of weeks, some very interesting things happened. Probably the most interesting thing for me was that President Trump was fact-checked by Twitter. He was spouting whatever he happened to be spouting, talking about whatever he was talking about, and Twitter fact-checked him, pointed out essentially inaccuracies in what he was talking about. And he went into a rage, essentially went so far as to say he would sign an executive order banning that, regulating Twitter, essentially stopping anyone checking what he said. And there's lots and lots of issues here, because if you think about it, going all the way back at least and since, I guess, the Brexit campaign, the election of Donald Trump in particular, where people were alleging that social media was being used to manage disinformation campaigns, to manipulate politics. I believe they were blaming at least the Russians in the American one, but they blamed various state actors. There has always been a concern that maybe we should be regulating the use of social media. Now, interesting, in the last in the last 3 or 4 days, you've had Twitter very much on one side and Mark Zuckerberg for Facebook on the other, saying, yes, we should be doing some sort of regulation managing that people can't just say whatever they want. And there should be some fact checking versus we are a massive proponent of freedom of speech. You know what? There's perfectly valid reasons to side with either. And to be honest, if I was in a moot, by the way, is a legal competition where you challenge a point of law between two sides, I would happily be on both sides. I can think of good arguments either way. But there's a wider picture here in that actually social media is being used in a way now that it could be actually detrimental to public safety, could be certainly detrimental to, well, all sorts of things, economic interests for sure. In the last few, few weeks alone, we've seen some scary things. One of my favorite social media campaigns was when the SpaceX shuttle went up and people were posting pictures saying, flat earthers, what do you make of this? The earth is definitely round. That's not necessarily posting disinformation, it's information. But then you've got things like the flat earth campaign saying that the world is flat. Have any of them fallen off the end? They did say that if you go off the end, it's like Pac-Man, you come back on the other side. Make of that what you will. Down to things like the anti-vaxxers, down to things saying that COVID can only be caught in certain ways, but also things around things like the protests here in Hong Kong, where social media has played a big part in both sides in terms of pro-protesters, anti-protesters, and now of course we're seeing it in the US with the protests that are going on there, where my feed in particular, having a lot of friends in the US, is like a big echo chamber, but I seem to get both sides of people saying this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, but nothing is verified. An issue we've got is that social media is becoming the main source of news for so many people. They're not going to what they may deem to be a reputable source. They may be finding that social media is saying that a certain source isn't reputable, and so they're just coming up with whatever they can see and sharing it, and that news spreads. It's like essentially having a village full of people. Somebody starts a rumour, they trust the person who spread the rumour, or at least it's someone who's their friend, they pass it on, and that becomes essentially the news. And previously I was like, well, you know, people are smart enough to realise that this shouldn't be an issue. They'll know when something's wrong. But I've had people, you know, you get people sharing things with you saying, oh, if you don't do this, this and this, then Facebook will do this to you. If you fill in this form, then you'll get given a load of money. And the amount of times they have to go onto Snopes, the fact-checking website, and then post about going, this is a hoax, this is a hoax, this is a hoax. You probably remember the one about needles being found on seats, or in, that did happen in Hong Kong, or in phone booths which were then infected with AIDS and you'd catch AIDS, which again was a hoax. There needs to be perhaps some sort of mechanism to control it. Now, here in Hong Kong, we're getting something called the National Security Laws about to come in. We don't really know what it involves. There's a concern, I guess, amongst some Hong Kongers that it may involve regulation of the internet. We don't know, we'll have to wait and see. You'll check it out on the press, you'll see all the pros and cons of why people are for it, why people are against it. I'm not going into that. But there's a very different approach, for example, in China and other countries and Russia, to how the internet is controlled. And I've talked about data sovereignty before, which includes social media, which is heavily regulated. And if you say the wrong thing on social media, if you're essentially spreading disinformation, query who decides what disinformation is, then you can go to jail. It can be a criminal offence. In the West, or at least most countries in the West, it's a different story. You have complete freedom of speech. You can say what you want on social media subject to applicable laws. And there will be things like essentially laws relating to libel and slander. Well, most likely be liable because you're publishing something. So you can't essentially say something about someone that's untrue and ruin their reputation, down to inciting, I suppose, ethnic violence. All sorts of discrimination even may come under it. But it does require someone to take action against you. Most often it has to be someone notices and makes a civil case. It's not essentially not a criminal matter. And I wonder where the balance is in this. So my two questions for you. Do we need to regulate social media? Do we need to control disinformation? I mean, it's a completely separate issue to the issue of how much data is being collected and shared. This is more, do we try and protect and make sure that what's going out on social media is true and accurate, and how do we decide what it is? Or do we continue the way we're going, where everything is essentially running free? Now, pre-COVID, people were very heavily looking at ways to regulate. I mean, I mentioned earlier the election of Donald Trump. There was a concern, and indeed Brexit and the Cambridge Analytica scandal, there was a concern that perhaps we need to be a bit careful when the vast majority of the world's population now seem to be getting their information from a source that is not fact-checked, not tested. Do we actually need some fact-checking systems in place? Now, my view is that we do. I don't think we need to control it. I don't need to regulate to the point that people can go to prison for what they post. I think that's going too far, unless it's something that's really like real hate spree, inciting hatred to the point that people are getting murdered, then maybe. But do we need something that's a fact-checking system across all posts? And I think we do. This may just because I'm sick of people telling me things that have come from some conspiracy website, and I'm like, well, hang on, this is a bit ridiculous. But I think it would be helpful because the world we're living in now, if you think about not even that long ago, the 2010s, most of your news was coming from TV news, newspapers, online news, and normally they would be a reputable source. But now you've got no one to actually check that against. I regularly get things in my social media feed telling me that a celebrity has died, and I immediately have to go and check. So, well, when did they die? Because often people post something about someone who died years and years and years ago. Tony Hart, the children's TV presenter, has died in my feed at least 4 times, and he's been dead quite a long time now. If you don't know who he is, he's responsible for Morph. Look him up. So I do think there is a need for some regulation, but I do also worry that as soon as a regulator gets on top of it, it could go too far. What I do think we need to be thinking about is how we act as individuals who essentially have the freedom of speech, the freedom to use the internet, the freedom to use social media, and how we behave on there. Someone once said to me, it was my doctor when I was very young and I was about to go to university, and she said, the thing you will learn when you go to university is that 99% of people in the world are idiots. But that is a moving 99%, and at any point you will fall into that 99% and you will fall out again. So we're all open to doing something that may be a bit gullible, a bit stupid, a bit reckless, ill thought out. It was very good advice. But I think as citizens, online citizens, perhaps we need to take a bit more control and be a bit more careful about what we're doing. I was asked this week to pull out something called a non-disparagement clause. This is essentially a social media clause where you don't start posting nasty things about your employer, staff or competitors or clients online to try and stop people essentially leaving their job and then being, right, I hate this company, I'm going to do this to them. Or I know Kathy in accounts is actually a dominatrix, or I don't know a Kathy in accounts, this isn't a oblique reference, I want to stress that. But all sorts of things that could be bad. And I think perhaps we do need some sort of rules, probably something a bit more than the existing rules, but I do think they come down to a warning. Essentially, if you post something, our systems are now powerful enough that they can check the facts against something you posted and it alerts if there's disinformation. I also think there needs to be protections against obviously fake accounts. I don't know if you've ever used the internet on something that's talking about an issue that's relevant to Russia or China. Though it happens with other nationalities too, but Russia and China seem to have the biggest army. Look out for things that are called the 50-cent trolls for China, or the essentially fake accounts, often stolen Facebook accounts or Twitter accounts that are just used to post disinformation, often badly written. Again, a bit like the people doing the phishing attacks. Spell checker, some sort of agent checking these things would improve their service no end, but some sort of control needs to be there. I've reported these sort of accounts on Facebook and never got anywhere in the past. But I'd be interested in what you think. How does that, does this regulation like? I think it should be a self-regulating approach, but again, do we trust social media companies to do that? I also think that we should be able to rely more on other people essentially investigating these things and calling them out. The problem then, of course, is people aren't going to call each other out in an echo chamber. They will just essentially force the view. The flat earthers are going to report somebody who says the earth is round, same as someone who says the earth is round will report the flat earthers. So I don't know how that's the answer. But it's a very difficult thing. I think it's the most difficult thing since we were trying to define the limits of freedom of speech, of what people can and can't do, which is essentially things such as libel, as I was talking about earlier, slander and libel as earlier on, or essentially incitement to do something absolutely terrible. So I think it's an interesting question. But yeah, interesting what you think too. I will be back again next week with probably a bit longer video. I'll probably giving feedback about what I was talking about when I was talking on my data privacy webinar. But in the meantime, have a great rest of the week. Hope that your week, if it's going badly, improves. I'm willing to think that given this time of year in 2020, what's going on in the world, the majority of you to some extent are having a bad week. But if you're not, I hope it stays good. If you are, hope it gets better. But I'll be back very, very soon. Take care.